911, the address of your emergency.
I just had a 12-year-old boy show up here at my front door asking for help. And he's said he just came from a neighbor's house, and we know there's been problems at this neighbor's house. He's emaciated, he's got tape around his legs, he's hungry, and he's thirsty.
Okay. Is your door locked?
No, I'm sitting outside with him on the front patio.
Okay, cool.
And he asked us to call the police.
What's
So
his
he's
name?
very afraid.
It's hard to fathom how deep the scars of a childhood can run when the hands causing them are the same ones meant to protect. For Ruby Franke's children, those scars weren't just emotional. They were physical, raw, and undeniable.
As to this alleged abuse that we're seeing now.
People have been pointing out how problematic this family is for a while.
When does the way a parent parents go from cringeworthy to child abuse?
There wasn't a single corner of their young lives left untouched by fear, pain, and control. But what makes this story even darker is that the woman responsible wasn't just their mother. Ruby Franke was a parenting guru, a YouTube sensation with millions of followers hanging on her every word, eager to learn the art of raising children right.
Ruby Franke was a YouTuber and had millions of followers for her 8 Passengers channel. That's where Ruby's claim to fame really came from.
I think the kids are more excited about the presents the siblings are getting than the ones they're getting.
Behind the glossy videos and perfect family smiles, though, was a nightmare brewing. A home that should have been a sanctuary became a prison. For Ruby's kids, love was unconditional, and obedience came with a price. While the world praised her for her wisdom, her children were enduring a reality no child should ever face.
There were people who were concerned about the things that she was doing to punish her children. She had her son who left his socks outside, made him do push-ups.
Put them in your pocket so you can take them down to the hamper and drop and give me 10.
1.
Put your hands straight out. They're in. They're not supposed to be out. Shape your hands forward. There you go.
They endure starvation as punishment, isolation as discipline, and a total deprivation of their humanity. The moment that shook everything was when one of Ruby's children, desperate and clinging to life, escaped. A frantic call for help revealed the horrors within their home. They found a child, weak and malnourished, with open wounds and bound limbs. This was calculated, methodical abuse, a betrayal so profound it left the world reeling.
The 12-year-old son ends up getting out of a window in their basement and make his way to the neighbor's house. He's asking for a drink and food. The neighbor, he sees ligature marks. He sees what he describes as emaciated and malnourished. Based on what was found on his wrists and his ankles, this child was tied up for quite some time.
How did a mother, celebrated as a role model, turn her own home into a house of horrors? And how did she maintain this facade for so long? What went so wrong in Ruby Franke's story that she chose control, cruelty, and discipline over the very children she was supposed to love? This is a story about abuse, about how someone weaponized their influence, their power, and their celebrity to cover up the unthinkable. And for Ruby Franke's children, the cost wasn't just their innocence, it was their survival. It all started back in 2015. Ruby and her husband Kevin launched their family YouTube channel, 8 Passengers. It seemed innocent at first, a cheerful look into the lives of parents raising 6 kids.
8 Passengers was started several years ago by both Ruby Franke and her husband Kevin. They have 6 children together, and it was kind of that initial mommy blog YouTube channel where Ruby would basically invite people into her life with her husband and her children.
She focused her family as the main driving source of content for her platform.
The vlogs quickly gained popularity, pulling in over 2.5 million followers. Parents flocked to their channel, drawn to Ruby's confident parenting tips and advice.
8 Passengers was the wild ride of the Franke family, with over 2 million subscribers over the years. Most likely by parents who were looking at this, looking at the tactics used, looking to them for advice, as so many do on social media.
But as the years went by, cracks began to show. By 2020, what once looked like a wholesome family began to unravel in the public eye.
You yelled at me.
Shh. The fact that I yell at my kids is a secret. We don't want our viewers to know.
Viewers noticed troubling patterns in their videos. Ruby's parenting tactics were no longer just strict, they were harsh, even cruel. For instance, there was one moment when her young daughter Eve forgot to pack her lunch. Instead of stepping in, Ruby decided this was a learning opportunity. She refused to bring her child food, saying that Eve needed to learn responsibility, even if it meant going hungry for an entire school day. Teachers reportedly felt uneasy watching a hungry child in their care, but Ruby brushed it off, insisting it was necessary.
Eve did not pack a lunch today, and can I bring a lunch over to the school? This happens quite often when you're raising children. Eve is responsible for making her lunches in the morning, so the natural outcome is she's just going to need to be hungry. And hopefully nobody gives her food and nobody steps in and gives her a lunch.
The punishments only got worse. One of the boys left his socks outside, and Ruby forced him to do push-ups as punishment, coaching him on how to hold his hands properly while he followed her commands. Then came Chad, her oldest son. For months, he was stripped of his bedroom. Ruby determined that he required more time for reflection, not due to a minor incident. For months on end, she forced him to sleep on a beanbag instead of a bed. It wasn't just a punishment, it was dehumanizing. And what did he do? Well, Ruby had taken away his room because of a joke he made months earlier. She didn't just take away his bed, she stripped him of his dignity and comfort. And yet, Ruby didn't try to hide any of this. She posted it for the world to see, as if her methods were something to be proud of.
My bedroom was taken away for 7 months, and then you give it back like a couple weeks ago.
I don't think our viewers know that.
You've been sleeping on a beanbag.
I've been sleeping on a beanbag since October.
Chad didn't get any room. He didn't get anything. He was sleeping on the floor in the family room.
Over time, viewers started noticing physical signs that something wasn't right. There were rumors of injuries, split fingers, bloody noses, things that were brushed off but raised red flags for anyone watching closely. And it extended beyond what the camera captured. People who had personal interactions with Ruby described her as rigid, with an almost heartless approach to discipline. There were whispers at gatherings about Ruby leaving her children unattended and giving them medications just to get them to sleep. It wasn't long before petitions began to surface online, demanding action against Ruby and Kevin. Thousands signed, voicing their concerns about the children's welfare. Local authorities conducted welfare checks on their home in Springvale multiple times, but somehow nothing was changed. The kids had to bear the brunt of everything. By the time the world truly understood the extent of the damage, it was too late. After that, things spiraled further for Ruby Franke and her family. By 2020, the public began to connect the dots, growing more suspicious about what was happening behind closed doors. People were no longer just watching her videos, they were alarmed. Multiple online petitions began circulating on change.org, urging Child Protective Services to step in and investigate the family. Almost all of these petitions got thousands of signatures.
Many of the viewers of 8 Passengers over the past 2 or 3 years became more and more disturbed and started turning Ruby and Kevin into Child Protective Services in Utah.
Overall, Ruby's situation became somewhat heated, and she was subjected to random checkups. Most importantly, Ruby encountered significant criticism and backlash on her channel.
Online who hate me, who would like to cancel me, who would like to see me either burn in hell, as I have told, or disappear off the face of the earth. And I'm not going anywhere.
That's why by 2022, Ruby completely abandoned her 8 Passengers YouTube channel. The account, which was once filled with videos showcasing her family life, had fallen silent. But Ruby wasn't stepping away from the spotlight. Instead, she had partnered with Jody Hildebrandt, a family therapist with a controversial past.
Hi, we are live in Mapleton, Utah, and we have Ruby here. And Ruby is a part of the original 10 women that are being trained to become mental fitness trainers.
Together, they launched a new platform called Moms of Truth, where they shared their extreme views on parenting and discipline. Jody Hildebrandt wasn't new to controversy. As a licensed clinical mental health counselor in Utah, she had already faced significant backlash for her questionable practices. Her program, Connections, provided one-on-one coaching sessions and classes with the goal of strengthening relationships and enhancing mental health. On paper, it seemed like a noble mission, but behind the scenes, there was a darker side. Years earlier, a client named Adam Steed had placed Jody on probation for breaching ethical boundaries.
She didn't want me to leave her therapy group. I couldn't go to any other therapist. I was trying to go to other therapists because they were saying I was an addict in denial, and it was just crazy. When I tried to get away, she changed everything and went after me in the most bizarre way I've ever seen, and then ruined my whole life.
Jody faced probation years earlier for breaching ethical boundaries with one of her clients.
She strips you of identity, she strips you of credibility, she isolates. And so she's saying everything that you say is a lie. Everything that you say is manipulation. You're lying and destroying everyone's life. So for the sake of everyone else's safety, we're duct taping you.
People at the client's workspace and church received personal and sensitive details that should have remained private.
I was just so messed up emotionally and mentally after Jody Hildebrandt that I was scared of my own name. When you're a victim of child abuse and your therapist, Jody Hildebrandt, tells you the PTSD and the trauma from that is just your sexual addiction, and then she throws you into a class, and then the other 3 guys start talking about being a voyeurist with victims, being an exhibitionist with victims, being an incest person with victims, was extremely uncomfortable.
She used what should have been a safe space as a weapon against him. The damage was devastating. The emotional scars left someone unable to trust their own decisions, doubting their sense of identity. The therapy wasn't helping, it was tearing them apart. Jody didn't stop at emotional control. The methods she used extended into physical punishment and isolation. Stories surfaced of people being forced to sleep outside in harsh winter conditions with nothing but a thin sleeping bag.
I was sleeping outside in the snow in the middle of winter in Utah. I wasn't allowed to have a bed. She told everyone that it was like a mummy bag, sub-zero type of sleeping bag. No, it was absolutely not. Her justification to the police was that she was preparing me for outdoor wilderness therapy.
This wasn't preparation for life. It was cruelty disguised as discipline. Justifications for these actions often made no sense, but they were delivered with a chilling certainty that left no room for questioning. By this time, Ruby had become fully involved in Connections. She was listed as a certified mental fitness trainer. Together, Ruby and Jody began pushing an ideology that blurred the line between parenting and domination. Their teachings didn't foster connection or growth. They enforced strict control at any cost.
Connections is unique. It's an anomaly in the world. People don't understand that they can actually heal their pain. And if you have not joined the Connections family, I would encourage you strongly.
As more stories came out about Jody's tactics, concerns about Ruby's involvement deepened. The warning signs were all there. Her move from the public spotlight of YouTube to this private, more extreme platform only added to the unease. People had already seen enough to fear for her children, but now they weren't just worried. They were desperate for someone to step in and put an end to it. After that, Ruby's partnership with Jody Hildebrandt took a devastating turn. Jody, who built her brand on strict discipline and radical honesty, seemed like an extreme figure even in the world of life coaching. She presented herself as a champion of truth, pushing people to own up to their mistakes and failures. But her methods were far from ordinary. Ruby and Jody together were a dangerous combination, amplifying each other's harsh approaches to parenting and control. Under Jody's advice, Ruby left her husband Kevin and moved into Jody's home in Ivins, Utah. Due to this decision, Ruby frequently left her 2 teenage daughters, Abby and Julie, alone in their Springville home, miles away, without adult supervision for weeks at a time. Neighbors noticed something wasn't right. They reached out to the police twice in 2022, concerned about the safety of Ruby's children. But it wasn't just the absence of a parent that raised alarms. There was an underlying sense that something darker was happening. Then the breaking point came. In late August 2023, officers in the Santa Clara Ivins area received a call.
I just had a 12-year-old boy show up here at my front door asking for help.
The Santa Clara Ivins public safety area basically got a phone call, and officers were alerted of a situation at a home in Ivins, Utah, the home of Jody Hildebrandt. That is where 2 of Ruby Franke's younger children were at the time 9 and 12. One of them was able to leave and run to a neighbor's house.
A 12-year-old boy showed up at a neighbor's doorstep, desperate for help. He was emaciated, his small body weak from hunger.
You know there's been problems at this neighbor's house. He's emaciated, he's got tape around his legs, he's hungry, and he's thirsty. And he asked us to call the police. So he's very afraid.
By listening to that 911 call, which still haunts me to this day as a father of a 2-year-old myself, the neighbor, an older gentleman, extremely compassionate in this situation and can't believe what has just stumbled upon his doorstep.
His legs were bound with duct tape, and his wrists bore the marks of prolonged restraint. He was covered in wounds, and his condition left no room for doubt. He had been subjected to horrifying abuse.
This kid has obviously been, I think he's been detained. He's obviously covered in wounds. We need the cops here as soon as possible.
The child was scared, thirsty, and starving, but he managed to find the courage to ask the neighbor to call the police. The boy had escaped through a basement window at Jody's home. The neighbor, shocked and compassionate, gave him food and water before contacting authorities. What they saw was impossible to forget. The boy's wrists and ankles had been tied for so long that his injuries were blistered and raw. Officers from multiple agencies, including the Springville Police and Utah County's Major Crimes Task Force, launched a search. They went to Ruby's home in Springville, determined to find the missing children. When knocking on the door didn't work, they forced their way in, breaking down the door. But the house was empty. The children weren't there. The trail led them to Pam Batcher, a close friend of Jody's and a 3rd member of the Connections program.
We're right now in the house.
In the living room, okay.
Okay, great. We're gonna have both of you come out here then.
If you can, just for a second, we just have to go over some stuff.
You have a warrant?
Yeah, we do.
Let me see it, please.
So it's in my car, but right now my concern is.
Will you just tell them you're all right?
Well, yeah, we have to physically see her.
Under that doorway.
We'll go ahead and get the copy of the warrant for you, okay?
You have a warrant for my house?
Specifically for you.
For you and the child.
Yeah. Okay.
Officers tracked down Pam and found Ruby's daughters at her house. The girls were unharmed, but questions remained. Why were they there? What role had Pam played in all this? Pam claimed she was simply helping Ruby during a family emergency. She told officers the girls had been helping her clean and eating ice cream.
I did make her scrub. I did make her scrub the floor, and they vacuumed and stuff because I have company coming tonight from Costa Rica.
Okay.
So, but she did it of her own free will. We had lunch.
Yeah.
We went to Rolly's farm and had ice cream.
Okay.
So.
Okay.
Authorities detained Pam for questioning, trying to untangle the story. Ruby had contacted Pam earlier, asking her to watch the girls. Pam agreed, thinking it was nothing more than a favor.
Said she had a family emergency.
And need you to pick up the girls.
Yeah, she said, would you mind watching the girls while I'm gone? Because she was leaving. I said, yeah, I could do that because I need some help cleaning.
Okay, and then did you say to bring them to your house for today and then take it back home tonight, or to keep them here for a couple days?
She didn't say. I was just planning on bringing them home tonight.
Oh, okay.
After that, the situation finally hit a breaking point. The children, Russell and Eve, were taken into state custody. For years, there had been whispers and concerns about Ruby Franke's parenting, but now the evidence was undeniable. This wasn't just a case of poor judgment. It was child abuse on a scale that shocked the world. Ruby's treatment of her children was beyond strict. It was relentless, cruel, and heartbreaking. Ruby's punishments did more than just enforce discipline. They also shattered her children's spirits. There was one incident with her son Russell that stood out among the many horrors. Ruby demanded that he stand in the sun wearing his hat. When he refused, she didn't see it as a child resisting. She saw it as defiance, something darker. In her twisted logic, she believed his demon was hiding in the shade. So she pushed him into the sunlight, determined to make him obey. When he still resisted, she escalated the situation. She came back holding a cactus poker. Without hesitation, she jabbed the sharp point into his back. He didn't even react, his body too numb to flinch. She poked him again, this time on the neck. When he didn't respond, Jody stepped in, tapping his cheeks to wake him up. However, the boy remained detached, lost in a trance-like state, far removed from the pain and humiliation inflicted upon him. Still unsatisfied, Ruby asked him if he understood that his family and his savior loved him. Then, as if that wasn't enough, she poured hot mop water over his body, mocking the situation. "It feels good, doesn't it?" she asked, dismissing his suffering entirely. He could only nod, too scared to say otherwise. Later that same day, she forced him into a pool, pushing his head underwater. She grabbed his face and spoke to him as if trying to reach the sun she thought was buried somewhere beneath his silence. "I love you," she told him, her words contradicting her actions. But it wasn't love, it was control, pure and simple. Her daughter Eve wasn't spared either. Ruby labeled her as manipulative and subjected her to punishments that were both physical and emotionally scarring. One incident involved food, or rather the lack of it. Eve had been fasting for 2 days, and when she begged to eat, Ruby extended the punishment by another day. The little girl, starving and desperate, began making rhymes about her mom's cruelty. "My mom starves me and calls it fasting," she sang bitterly, exposing the cold reality of her situation. But Rudy didn't stop there. At one point, she cut chunks of Eve's hair, punishing her for what she saw as rebellion. As if that weren't degrading enough, she dragged her daughter to a dog wash, doused her in cold water, and threatened her. When Eve cried about running away, Jody stepped in, warning her that she had no idea what dangers were waiting beyond their control. The abuse wasn't limited to these acts, it was a pattern. Ruby accused her children of stealing water, and when they were thirsty, punished them with threats of shaving their heads and forced them into degrading situations over and over again. These weren't moments of discipline. They were calculated attempts to break their will, strip them of their dignity, and assert absolute control over their lives. So in 2023, Ruby Franke and her business partner Jody Hildebrandt were arrested in Utah. Both were charged with 6 counts of aggravated child abuse. The charges stemmed directly from the horrific injuries and neglect suffered by Russell and Eve. The world couldn't believe how something like this had gone unnoticed for so long. To many, it felt like something out of a nightmare or a crime thriller. A story so cruel and twisted that it didn't seem real.
You're talking about serious bodily injury and you get to the aggravated child abuse portion of it, which is a 2nd-degree felony. That's a 1 to 15 year sentence, which is what these charges ended up being. Sometimes that's related to emotional abuse. Sometimes that's related to severe malnutrition. It can be a combination of them.
Then, Ruby made a decision that surprised many. She pleaded guilty. She admitted to multiple counts of aggravated child abuse, acknowledging the harm she had caused. Standing in court, Ruby accepted guilt for her actions, taking responsibility for what had happened to her children.
Ms. Franke, how do you plead to count 1, aggravated child abuse, a second-degree felony?
Guilty.
To count 3, aggravated child abuse, a second-degree felony?
Guilty.
To count 5, aggravated child abuse, a second-degree felony?
Guilty.
And to count 6, aggravated child abuse, a second-degree felony?
With my deepest regret and sorrow for my family and my children, guilty.
Jody Hildebrandt followed the same path. Like Ruby, she pled guilty to multiple counts of aggravated child abuse. Her methods, her influence, and her partnership with Ruby had left an indelible trail of pain. In court, there was no attempt to deny or justify what had happened. Both women faced the consequences of their actions. But questions remained. What would this mean for Ruby and Jody? Would they serve time for what they had done? Or would their punishment fall short of the harm they caused? Now here is one important point we need to talk about. Ruby Franke's decision to admit guilt changed everything. She was no longer just facing the charges, but also turning into a key witness against her former business partner, Jody Hildebrandt. The dynamic completely changed, linking Jody directly to the same abuses Rudy had perpetrated on her children. What followed revealed an even darker, more horrifying picture.
This morning, Ruby Franke pleaded guilty to 4 counts of aggravated child abuse. The state agreed to dismiss the 2 other counts of child abuse, and she agrees, I'll read this one verbatim. She agrees to testify truthfully against Jody Hildebrandt, and in return, the Washington County Attorney's Office agrees to remain neutral regarding future hearings before the Utah Board of Pardons and Parole.
As part of Jody's plea agreement, a disturbing detail surfaced. One of the children, Eve, had been forced to jump into a cactus multiple times. It wasn't a punishment anyone could rationalize. It was pure cruelty. The evidence stacked against Jody and Ruby painted a grim picture of what life had been like for the children in their care. Finally, on February 28, 2024, both Ruby and Jody faced sentencing.
Sentence will be that Ms. Franke serve 4 counts, 4 1 to 15-year sentences based on her convictions for 4 counts of aggravated child abuse. Again, they will be served consecutively pursuant to the parties' agreement and the applicable statute. Under the applicable statute, the court finds that that consecutive sentences are appropriate. Ms. Hildebrandt, this circumstance is tragic. It's largely, of course, of your making. By any measure, your conduct in this case was disastrous for these children. Adults are supposed to protect children. Adults with specialized training in particular are supposed to protect children. You didn't do that in this case. In this case, you terrorized children, and the results have been tragic.
The courtroom heard a haunting description of what had taken place between May and August of 2023.
From May to August in 2023, Ms. Franke and her business partner held her 2 children, ages 9 and 11, turning 12, in a concentration camp-like setting. The children were regularly denied food, water, beds to sleep in, and virtually all forms of entertainment. They were isolated from others and were hidden when people came to visit the house where the children and the defendants were staying. The children were forced to do physical tasks like carrying loaded boxes up and down stairs and wall sits or sitting against a wall without a chair or stool for hours at a time. They were also forced to do manual labor outdoors in the extreme summer heat, at times without shoes or socks. They were forced to stand outside on a cement patio in the summer heat for hours and even days at a time. They were beaten, and the 12-year-old was regularly bound hand and foot after he attempted to run away in mid-July. Both children had extensive physical injuries from the abuse that required hospitalization when they were found.
During that time, Ruby and Jody held 2 young children, ages 12 and 10, in conditions described as concentration camp-like. The suffering was unimaginable, and it left everyone asking the same question. What would have happened if Russell hadn't escaped? If he hadn't found the courage to run to a neighbor for help? There's no telling how much longer they would have endured the abuse. The judge delivered Ruby's sentence first. 4 counts of aggravated child abuse, each carrying a 1 to 15-year sentence. The sentences would be served consecutively. Ruby's admission of guilt spared her children from the trauma of a trial, but it couldn't erase the horrors they had already endured.
I think Ruby's motivation behind pleading guilty was to not put her children through this extended process where she's fighting it and the children potentially have to get up and testify. I think she obviously very clearly wants to reconcile with her children. So I think that there was a notion of her letting her children know that she was taking accountability for it, that she recognized what she did was wrong, and that she's going to be better going forward.
Now after that, the spotlight turned to another question. What about Kevin Franke, Ruby's husband and the father of her children? His role in the chaos wasn't immediately clear, but as details emerged, his connection to Jody Hildebrandt became a part of the puzzle. As we discussed before, Ruby's separation from Kevin wasn't just a personal choice. It was heavily influenced by Jody's methods. It mirrored what others had experienced after getting involved with Jody's counseling. Jody had a pattern of tearing apart marriages. She facilitated men's groups where husbands were told they were the problem, constantly degraded, and pushed to repent for their supposed failures. Kevin wasn't spared.
Directives came from Jody, the licensed mental health counselor. I definitely voiced my opposition and concern, and it was always flipped back onto me of saying, well, you know, this is why your children are disobedient. This is why you're having problems with your children, because you just enable them all the time. You're the problem, Kevin.
He was told the best way to protect his family was to stay away from them, isolating him even further.
Kevin was attending men's groups that were facilitated by Jody. He was being downgraded and diminished and told how bad he was and that he needed to repent, and that the best way to repent was to not infect his family with his problems, and that's why you need to stay away.
Despite the distance, Ruby reached out to Kevin right before the arrest. She claimed there was an emergency with the kids and urged him to come. Kevin, unaware of the full scope of what was happening, rushed over. Only after arriving did he begin to grasp the extent of the horrors that had unfolded while he was kept away.
He was working, and she pretty much just said, "This is an emergency. I need you to come get the kids." He, of course, tore down there, not knowing any of the details of all this that was going on till he got there.
With Ruby and Jody behind bars, a new chapter began. Kevin filed for divorce and began fighting for custody of his younger children. Once he learned the full truth about the abuse and trauma his kids had endured, he decided it was time to act. But regaining custody wasn't simple. The state had a process in place to help the children recover from the trauma they had endured under Ruby and Jody's care. Kevin was fully committed to that process, working to support their rehabilitation while navigating the legal fight for his parental rights. For Kevin, the journey was far from over. The damage caused by Ruby and Jody left a lasting mark on the children. Rebuilding their trust and creating a safe environment for them was no small task. The state's focus was on helping them heal, and Kevin was determined to do everything in his power to be there for them.
Life right now for me is getting back into I would say a comfortable normal. There's still a lot of pain, there's still a lot of healing that I work on each day, but it just looks and feels different now. I'm moving on, and I'm going to do what's best for my children, for my family, and for myself, and that's not going to include her.